I woke to a soft tapping on the wall, like fingernails dragging across plaster. At first, I thought it was the building settling. Old pipes, old beams, but the rhythm was deliberate, uneven, almost impatient. I froze under my blankets, straining to listen. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the door, a whisper curled and vanished. "Don't leave." The apartment was silent again, except for my own shallow breathing. Shadows pooled in the corners like liquid, stretching longer than the weak glow of the street lamp outside. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from a neighbor I didn't know. "Be careful tonight. You're not alone." A sudden chill made the hairs on my arms rise. The tapping started again, louder, coming from the living room this time. I swung the blanket off, heart hammering, and reached for the light switch. The room remained dark, even as the lamp clicked on. Then I saw it, a shape pressed against the window pane, but no reflection, no outline beyond the faint distortion of glass. It lingered, unmoving, waiting. My mouth went dry, and the phone slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor. The whisper came again, closer, from the hallway. "You shouldn't be here." And just like that, the front door clicked shut behind me, though I hadn't touched it. I didn't know who or what was in my apartment, but I knew I wouldn't sleep tonight. I stayed awake the rest of the night, pressed against the wall of my bedroom, listening to the apartment breathe around me. The old building had always groaned, pipes shifting, floorboards protesting, but last night felt different. The shadows didn't just cling to the corners. They moved. Not in flickers, not in the half-seen shapes of sleep-deprived imagination, but like something deliberate, waiting for me to notice. I didn't call anyone. My phone sat face down on the floor, the faint glow of its screen fading. I didn't want to hear voices that might sound like someone else, or something else. I told myself it was stress. I had moved into this apartment 3 weeks ago, on the edge of the city where buildings like this outnumbered people. I'd chosen it for its cheap rent, not its character. But cheap rent has a price. By morning, the apartment felt different. The living room smelled faintly of smoke, though I hadn't cooked. A chair was moved slightly from its usual place. Nothing major, nothing I could call proof. Just signs. Small, unnerving signs that whispered of another presence. I started keeping a journal, scribbling every odd detail. Taps, whispers, shadows that shouldn't be there. My neighbors were strange. Not unfriendly exactly, but all of them carried the same distant, cautious look. One morning, in the elevator, a woman with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes pressed a hand against mine as we passed and whispered, "Lock your doors at night. Do not answer if it knocks." Before I could ask what she meant, the doors opened and she disappeared. I tried to rationalize it. The building is old, people are tired, stress makes strangers seem ominous. But that night as I lay in bed, the tapping returned. Only this time, it came from the bedroom closet. I held my breath, gripping the sheets, telling myself it was the pipes, the walls, the house settling. But the closet door shifted, ever so slightly, and a draft slid out. It smelled like cold metal and wet earth, like something had been buried just beyond my view. I turned on every light in the apartment. Lamps, ceiling lights, the flickering fluorescent above the kitchen sink. Nothing moved when I looked, and yet I felt it. Watching. Waiting. Not a creature, not a person. Something older, patient, and purposeful. Days passed, but the apartment didn't let me forget it. Sometimes I would come home to the faint smell of something burning, even if nothing was on. Sometimes a picture frame would hang crooked, though I was certain I had placed it straight. Sometimes, when I reached for a glass of water, the faucet would turn itself on for a few seconds, then stop. Small things, minor things, but persistent. Things no one else seemed to notice. I asked around. One neighbor mentioned the previous tenant had left abruptly, not giving notice. Another said they'd heard crying late at night, the kind of cry that wasn't human, or at least wasn't entirely human. I laughed it off at first, pretending to myself that I was being paranoid. But then I started noticing more. The whispers, always soft, just beyond comprehension. Shadows that weren't in the corner but along the edges of my vision. And sometimes a shape would sit just outside the window, hunched and still, always watching, fading before I could blink. One evening, I came home to the living room in disarray. The couch cushions were thrown across the floor, the TV switched on to static, and the faint scent of wet earth lingered. I called out. No one answered. I reached for the couch cushions, shaking my head, trying to make sense of it. And then I heard it. A voice, low, rasping like air escaping from a buried tomb. "I see you." I jumped back, my heart hammering. The apartment was silent again. Too silent. I knew I shouldn't investigate, shouldn't lean into it, but curiosity, stubbornness, or maybe denial had me slowly walking toward the sound. My hand hovered over the couch, trembling, as if touching it would confirm what I already suspected. I was not alone. That's when I remembered the building's history. Old records, a brief mention in a city archive. Decades ago, the apartment had been a rooming house. Tenants vanished. Complaints of strange noises and smells. Evacuations after unexplained illnesses. And yet, it continued, a quiet place for the desperate, the cheap, the unaware. I tried talking to the landlord about it, casually, joking about old pipes and creaking floors. He looked at me for too long, the kind of look that carries secrets. Finally, he said, "Some apartments hold things. Some things don't leave, no matter who comes or goes." I laughed nervously, thanked him and left. But his words settled in my chest, heavy and suffocating. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized the apartment wasn't just old. It was alive. Not in the way walls and floors are alive. This was something else. A presence that noticed me, followed me, waited, and I began to understand something terrifying. It didn't want to hurt me, not yet. It wanted to see how I reacted, to see how long it could unnerve me. The first week, I thought it was the pipes. The second week, I thought I was imagining it. By the third week, I knew better. And then came the knock at the door. 3 short taps, deliberate, waiting. I froze, breath caught in my throat. It wasn't the building. It wasn't anyone I knew. And as the sound echoed into silence, I realized the apartment had finally spoken directly to me. Something was here, and it was no longer subtle. The first night after the knock, sleep became impossible. I kept my eyes on the apartment's corners, where shadows gathered like mist, shifting even in the lamplight. Every creak, every sigh of the building, felt amplified, deliberate. My journal filled with observations. Taps, cold spots, whispers. Notes about the neighbor's warnings, cryptic and urgent. Notes about the strange shape at the window, hunched and patient, always waiting. I began to explore the apartment's past. The city archive gave me brief glimpses. This building had been a rooming house in the 1920s. Tenants vanished. Complaints of strange noises, sudden illnesses, evacuations. One case mentioned a young woman found in her room, face frozen in a scream, with her diary open to a single entry. "They watch me from the walls." The words burned themselves into my memory. It wasn't just history. Something in the apartment wanted to remind me. Objects moved slightly out of place. The faint smell of wet earth followed me from room to room. Once, I woke to my keys on the kitchen counter, though I always left them on the hall table. And the shadows, they weren't in the corners anymore. They were on the walls, following, reaching. Voices began to speak. Not words exactly. Low murmurs, fragments that didn't make sense, drifting from the walls and ceilings. One night, I heard the words, "Leave, before it finds you." The voice was almost human, almost familiar, but there was something wrong. A rasp beneath the tones, a hunger that went beyond curiosity. I started noticing patterns. The tapping always came in threes. The cold spots formed near the bedroom closet and the bathroom doorway. I couldn't touch anything without feeling watched, and sometimes, when I looked into mirrors, I glimpsed something behind me. Not a reflection, but a presence. Neighbors began to whisper. I met Mrs. Klein, an elderly woman who had lived on the floor above for decades. Her apartment smelled of old books and lavender, and she had eyes too sharp for her age. She said, "Some apartments, they don't like new blood. They watch, they wait. You can't fight it, only survive it." I laughed nervously, masking fear with reason, but that night my laughter faltered. I returned home to find the living room rearranged in a way I had not done. Chairs facing the window, cushions stacked in a pyramid, and in the corner the faint outline of a figure. Dark, hunched, still. Flashbacks came in fragments. I remembered news clippings. Tenants disappearing, neighbors refusing to speak, police reports left incomplete. One story haunted me most, a man who moved in complaining of cold spots and whispers. He was found weeks later in the stairwell, eyes wide, mouth open, but no one saw him arrive. Nothing explained his death. As days passed, I noticed I was changing. I began waking before sunrise, heart pounding. My thoughts looped constantly on the apartment, the shadows, the whispers. Friends noticed I was distracted, jumpy. One evening, a text from my sister. "Are you okay? You sound different." I deleted it before reading. The apartment escalated. One night, while trying to make sense of a strange knocking pattern, I saw movement from the kitchen. A shadow shifted. Too fast to be human. I whispered, "Who's there?" No answer. Only the sound of breathing that was not mine. The backstory emerged slowly, in fragments. Mrs. Klein gave me pieces. Previous tenants vanished or left abruptly. Some spoke of a presence that feeds on attention, on fear, on life itself. A janitor mentioned strange noises, objects moving when no one was around, even the elevators behaving oddly. And in the city archives, a recurring name. The building's original owner, a recluse obsessed with occult rituals, rumored to have tried to bind spirits to the walls. Micro-events increased. The faucet would turn itself on at night, water running cold. Footsteps echoed above my head, though the building was empty. Objects vanished, only to reappear days later. And always the tapping in threes, always the whispers just beyond comprehension. Conversations became rare, sharp, and essential. One neighbor, a man in his 60s, said while handing me a package, "It's hungry. Don't provoke it. Don't let it in your mind." I asked him what he meant. He just shook his head, leaving the warning hanging like smoke in the air. I began seeing more. Shapes crouched in corners. Faces in mirrors. Pale, hollow-eyed, screaming silently. And sometimes reflections moved independently of me. I questioned my sanity, but the signs grew undeniable. My keys would disappear, the apartment door would be unlocked though I had locked it, the temperature would drop to ice cold in one corner while the rest of the room remained normal. One night, I decided to record the sounds. Microphone placed in the living room. Phone recording on the counter. Hours of nothing. Until I heard it. Soft, deliberate, whispering my name. "Come, see." The air thickened, the walls seemed to pulse as if the building itself were breathing. I tried to leave, but something stopped me. The front door, which had always opened easily, wouldn't budge. I pushed, pulled, slammed my shoulder against it. Silence. And then a low rasp just behind me. "No, you stay." It was inevitable. The apartment didn't just host me. It watched, it learned, it fed. The previous tenants hadn't been careless. They had been studied, tormented, drawn into a slow unraveling. And now it had me. Paranoia became my constant companion. I stopped trusting reflections, sounds, even my own thoughts. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper was a potential signal. I slept less. I ate less. I existed in a half-world of awareness, where the apartment and I were in a slow, unspoken struggle. And then, the final escalation. One morning, I woke to the living room transformed. Pictures ripped from walls, furniture overturned, a faint trail of soil across the floor. And on the wall, written in something wet and dark, a single word, "Alone." I understood in that instant that I had passed the threshold. Observation was over. The apartment had claimed my attention completely. And whatever resided here would not be denied. I didn't answer the knock that night. I didn't speak. I only watched, breathing shallow, heart hammering, waiting for the next move. Because I had realized something that no one else had told me. The apartment is patient. It waits. And it always gets what it wants. The night it all broke loose, I knew the apartment had stopped tolerating my ignorance. I had barricaded the bedroom door with chairs and boxes. but the sound of the tapping started almost immediately after I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted. Not the usual tapping. These were heavier, deliberate, like knuckles rapping against a coffin lid. 3, then 3, then 3 again, repeating in a rhythm that felt almost intelligent. I could hear breathing now, uneven and shallow, somewhere beyond the walls. Not mine. Not human. It rose and fell, circling me, filling every inch of the room with its presence. I pressed my back to the wall, rocking slightly, whispering to myself, "It's just the building. It's just the building." But even as I said it, I knew the truth. The closet door rattled. The sound was wet, almost sticky, like something inside it was crawling over the floorboards, scratching to escape. I froze, staring at the shadow behind the door. And then I heard the first whisper, low, deliberate, almost intimate. "You can't hide." I screamed. The apartment answered. The lamps flickered violently, plunging the room into alternating darkness and harsh white light. Shadows stretched impossibly long across the floor, pooling in corners, coiling around furniture. I felt the air thicken, heavy with something I couldn't see but could smell. Damp soil, decayed wood, and the faint metallic tang of blood. I tried the window. Locked. The front door. Locked. The sound of my own frantic breathing was joined by whispers from the walls, ceiling, and floorboards, all overlapping. "You belong here. Stay, stay." I ran through the apartment, stumbling over overturned furniture I hadn't moved. The living room had transformed. Walls seemed to bulge and pulse, as if the building itself had become a breathing entity. I tripped and fell to my knees, looking up. Shadows pressed against the ceiling, writhing and twisting. Faces formed in the walls, mouths open, screaming silently. One face was mine, my own distorted reflection screaming in terror. I tried to call for help. Phone dead. Nothing worked. I couldn't understand how the building consumed electronics, but every device failed. It wasn't just a haunting anymore. It was a siege. The apartment wanted me broken. It wanted me to see. And then the door behind me opened on its own. Slowly. Creaking. A shape stood in the hallway, hunched, impossibly thin, its outline blurred like smoke. I froze. The entity, whatever it was, tilted its head, observing, calculating. It stepped forward, silently, and I stumbled back. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but the apartment seemed to stretch infinitely, corridors folding back on themselves. "Why are you here?" I shouted, voice trembling. The shadow didn't answer. But the walls did. The walls whispered my name over and over, in 1,000 tones. High, low, broken, familiar. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop. The whispers became words. Sentences. I heard fragments of past tenants, crying, screaming, begging. "Leave. Don't let it in. It takes." I bolted for the kitchen. The refrigerator door swung open by itself. Inside I saw things. Small objects, personal items from past tenants, scraps of clothing, a photograph torn in half, all floating in midair, spinning slowly, as if suspended in water. And then one of the photographs twisted, revealing a face staring straight at me. Not human, not alive, but unmistakably watching. I ran to the living room, tripping over a chair. The windows were no longer transparent. Outside I could see nothing. No city lights. No street. Only darkness, thick and moving, as if the night itself had pressed against the glass. The shape at the window reappeared, hunched and patient. I felt it staring through me, not with eyes, but with a will. I screamed again. The apartment answered in kind. Every surface vibrated. The floor warped, creaking like ancient bones. The walls flexed, rippling. I fell to the ground, curling into myself, trying to become small, invisible. The shadow entered the room. I could feel it before I saw it. The air shifted, cold and damp, pressing down on me. The whispers stopped. Silence fell. And then a voice, clear, close inside my head. Finally, "You see." I scrambled backward, hands scraping the carpet. My mind was breaking. Logic and fear collided, and I realized the apartment was not only alive, it was conscious. And it had been studying me for weeks, learning my fears, my routines, my weaknesses. It spoke again, not with words but with sensations. Memories of previous tenants flashed before my eyes. The young woman found screaming in her room, the man in the stairwell, the janitor who vanished without notice. Each memory bled into mine, and I felt their terror as if it were mine. Leave, or stay forever. I tried to escape. I ran to the bedroom. The door, which I had barricaded, ripped free. Chairs and boxes flew across the room as if thrown by invisible hands. Shadows pooled, forming shapes that lunged at me. I screamed, clawing at the doorframe. My fingers bled. And then it happened. Time warped. One moment I was on the floor, the next I was standing in the hallway. But the hallway wasn't right. The walls were uneven, stretching into impossible angles. Doors opened into walls. The ceiling lowered and rose. My sense of direction failed completely. I saw glimpses of past tenants, shadows walking the same hallways, their faces pale and hollow-eyed. They whispered warnings, but I couldn't understand which way to run. The apartment had become a labyrinth designed to break me, to make me see what it wanted. And then the shadow spoke aloud for the first time, its voice like gravel and wind. "You are mine now." I froze. It circled me slowly. The whispers became screams, echoing from every wall. The floor beneath me cracked. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. I realized I could not leave. The apartment had claimed me, in body and in mind. I screamed, loud, desperate, but no sound escaped. My own voice was stolen, leaving only the pounding of my heart. The shadows pressed closer. One hunched figure reached toward me. I could see its fingers elongate impossibly, reaching past the physical, touching something inside me. You cannot escape. Not ever. And then I was falling through corridors that didn't exist, through floors that bent into nothingness, through walls that should have stopped me. Memories of past tenants flashed again, faces screaming, eyes pleading. And I understood, finally, that the apartment never let anyone go. Not really. I landed on the living room floor, gasping, disoriented. The shadows retreated just enough to let me see. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. The air was thick, the lights too bright, the walls too still. I touched the couch. Everything was solid, but I could feel the presence everywhere. Watching, waiting, learning. I tried to stand. The entity was behind me, hunched in the corner, patient. My reflection in the mirror rippled, not showing me, but some other shape. Twisted, hollow, waiting. I spoke, voice trembling. "What do you want?" The shadow tilted its head. A whisper, soft and intimate, almost kind. "Your fear. Your attention. Your life. Eventually." I sank to the floor, chest heaving. The apartment was alive, aware, and it was endless. Every wall, every shadow, every whisper was part of it. I realized I had been observing it, learning it, feeding it exactly as it had intended. And then the whisper became all around me, echoing in every direction. Stay, forever, or leave broken. I understood in that moment that it didn't matter what I chose. The apartment always won. Every previous tenant, every warning, every story I had read, they had all been absorbed, folded into the building's memory. And now so was I. I tried one last time to run. The hallway stretched impossibly. The door that should have led outside became a wall. I could hear the faint scurrying of something moving beneath the floor. Shadows pressed into my vision, murmuring, pulling, shaping the space. And finally, as my strength ebbed and my mind frayed, I understood. There was no escape. Not through doors, not through windows, not through reason. The apartment would wait. It would feed. It would claim. And someday, perhaps, someone else would move in, and the cycle would start again. I sat there, trembling, listening to the apartment breathe. The shadows receded slightly, leaving me alive, but hollow. And in the silence that followed, I knew it had marked me. I was not leaving this place whole. Morning came, or at least a pale imitation of it. The sun's light did not filter through my apartment as it once had. The windows were gray and dull, as if the city itself had been drained of color. I sat on the living room floor, knees drawn to my chest, staring at the walls. They were still. For now. The shadows that had hounded me through the night had receded, or perhaps they were simply waiting. The apartment felt different, empty yet alive, breathing, watching. I touched the walls. They were cold, solid, familiar, but beneath my fingers I could feel memory. The impressions of past tenants, their fear, their suffering, all folded into the plaster. I realized that I was now part of it. My presence, my terror, my attention had been absorbed. I rose slowly, every movement careful, tentative. The furniture remained overturned, objects scattered. The smell of damp earth lingered. I breathed through my mouth, trying to ignore it. Each step echoed, unnatural in the quiet, stretching longer than it should. I felt the building watching my movements, measuring my resolve, noting my exhaustion. I needed to leave. I had to leave. The front door, which had been my goal countless times, now seemed farther away than ever. I touched the handle. Locked. I tried to force it. Nothing. And then I heard it. Not a whisper this time, but a low, omnipresent voice, resonating through the walls, floor, and ceiling. "You belong." The panic rose, but with it, a strange clarity. I was alive. For now. And I could move. Slowly, I retraced my steps, noting every detail. The crooked picture frames, the scuff marks, the faint outlines of handprints on the walls. The apartment was showing me its history, its hunger, its power. Each observation was a reminder. I was no longer merely a tenant. I was a participant, a witness, perhaps eventually a victim. I thought of the neighbors. Mrs. Klein, the pale woman in the elevator, the man handing me packages. All warnings. They had lived with it, coexisted with it, survived it by knowing the rules, by never provoking what they could not fight. I had ignored them. I had thought curiosity, skepticism, and ordinary reason would protect me. They hadn't. I checked my phone. Dead. No signal. Not that I expected one. Not that anyone could save me. I left it on the counter, powerless, and realized that the apartment didn't just consume people. It isolated them, stripping away connection, leaving only awareness. The building thrived on solitude. It needed you to feel alone, unmoored, unanchored. I wandered from room to room, noting subtle changes. Walls slightly angled differently, shadows that hadn't been there the night before, a lingering dampness in the bathroom that smelled of soil and decay. I tried to remember the outside world, the city, my apartment's location, the street, but the memory felt distant, like a dream half forgotten. The apartment was imposing its reality over mine. In the living room, I saw the first sign of something truly irreversible. A chair, ordinary yesterday, had warped. The wood twisted unnaturally, bending toward me as if leaning, reaching. The cushions were soaked, heavy with moisture that wasn't water. And in the corner, just beyond my line of vision, a shape crouched. It wasn't entirely solid, more suggestion than substance, but I knew it was the same presence from the night before. Watching, waiting, patient. I spoke aloud, voice shaking. "I'm leaving. You can't stop me." The apartment answered, but not with movement, not with sound. It answered with perception. The air grew heavier. Shadows stretched impossibly. The floorboards flexed beneath me. My own reflection in the kitchen window rippled, distorting my face into something hollow and unfamiliar. I realized I was arguing with perception itself, with the will of the apartment, and that argument could not be won. I sank to the floor again, hands pressed to my ears, rocking slightly. Memories of past tenants flashed unbidden. The young woman found screaming, the man in the stairwell, the janitor who vanished. Their terror, their confusion, folded into mine. And in that moment, I understood. Their stories had not ended. They continued here, in the walls, whispered in the corners, folded into the architecture of fear. Time began to lose meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, or perhaps days. I no longer knew. My hunger, my exhaustion, my heart pounding, they all became one with the apartment's rhythm. It was alive. It was eternal. and I was only another pulse in its heartbeat. I tried to sleep, but sleep had abandoned me. Every shadow seemed closer, every corner deeper, every whisper sharper. I spoke to the shapes, reasoning aloud. I won't be broken. I'll survive this. But even as I said it, I knew the lie. Survival here was not about strength. It was about endurance, observation, patience, and quiet submission. I left the lights on, all of them, yet the apartment remained dim. Shadows pooled in corners, and reflections flickered in windows and mirrors. Occasionally, I glimpsed shapes moving in places they should not be, forms crouched, waiting, always waiting. I realized then that the apartment had a kind of intelligence. It remembered patterns. It observed behavior. Every step I took, every glance, every note I wrote in my journal, it recorded and digested. My fear was nourishment, my attention sustenance. It did not need to harm me tonight. It only needed me present, alive, fearful, observing, participating. I made my way to the bedroom, my usual refuge. The door, locked and barricaded, now opened smoothly, as if inviting me in. I entered. The air inside smelled faintly of decay and damp earth. I sat on the bed, hugging my knees. Outside, the city hummed with normalcy. Inside, I existed in a suspended liminal space between life and the apartment's dominion. And then, in a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, it spoke. "You are part of me now. Forever." I did not respond. I could not. Words felt useless, fragile against the weight of awareness pressing in on every side. The apartment did not require my submission. It already had it. My mind, my senses, my perceptions, all folded into its architecture. I understood that no one could save me, and that no one had ever truly escaped. I wrote in my journal, carefully, obsessively. Observations, notes, warnings. Perhaps someone would read them one day. Perhaps not. The apartment had learned to hide its history in plain sight. Only those who lived within it truly understood. And even then, understanding was survival, not freedom. I spent hours, or perhaps lifetimes, watching, listening, noting. The apartment moved subtly, testing, observing, shaping. A faint draft swept past me. A picture frame shifted. The floor creaked in a pattern I had learned to anticipate. The whispering began again, soft, patient, gentle. Observe. Endure. Exist. I realized I had changed. I was no longer merely a tenant. My own thoughts, my own fears, were now entwined with the building's consciousness. I existed partially as observer, partially as participant. And in that merging, a strange clarity arrived. The apartment was eternal. And so, in a way, was I. The city beyond my windows continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. People walked. Lives went on. But here, inside these walls, a different time existed. Shadows moved. Whispers lingered. Fear was a constant pulse, like blood. I stood at the window once, staring at the street. For a moment, I remembered life outside these walls. And then I remembered the tapping, the whispers, the shadows that had surrounded me since the first night. The apartment was patient. I would remain. And if anyone else came here, they would find me, and I would find them. I did not speak. I did not scream. I only watched, my mind alive in ways it had never been before. And in the silence, the final truth settled. The apartment keeps what it wants. It waits for attention, for fear, for life. And it never forgets. I am here. And I will remain. For the apartment does not merely house its tenants. It keeps them. Forever.